So the other day I was reminded of something that I had completely forgotten about: corporate posters. Even though I haven't done a whole lot of corporate work, I definitely know what these posters look like, and of course, they're not exciting and they're not fun. Really, they're only a few points better than just leaving the wall blank as it is. Because not only is the content not that great, but the designs are usually pretty lazy as well. And so that gave me an idea. What if I took these posters and made them exciting and actually well designed? And so that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna take those designs, we're gonna come up with some new ones, and hopefully at the end, we'll have some ones that are actually fun and interesting to look at. By the end of this video, I'm hoping to have 3 or 4, but that's really just gonna depend on how everything goes. But without further ado, let's get to it. So for this first poster, I kind of had an idea in my head of what I wanted to do. I wanted to have somebody on the top of a mountain and then just make a collage of things kind of around them. So it kind of makes it look like it's a success or, a victory, something in that vein. So really, that's where I started. So I found a photo that I liked, and I just started removing the background from the image so I'd have a good selection. After that, I was starting to play around with some different elements. I wanted to make it feel like this person went on an adventure, and now he's finally succeeded in getting to the top of the mountain, and now he's victorious. And so I wanted to play around with a bunch of different elements that might kind of lean into that kind of adventure and success. And so I thought a compass would be a perfect thing to add. I also added in this yellow circle in the background because I thought the color would go thematically, and would also really work well with the composition since you have this very jagged edge from the mountain. And so that will contrast well with a very nice clean circle of, I guess, what could be considered the sun. Something else that I wanted to add was this graphic of some terrain. Once again, just kind of leaning into that adventurous map kind of quality. But I thought this would kind of break up some of the imagery because everything else is either a photograph or solid color. So I thought this would kind of bring in some negative space that might be kind of cool to use. After that, I thought it'd be nice to add in some green foliage type things. So what I landed on were these images of leaves. I thought that would look really nice, and again, play into that kind of adventurous, outdoorsy kind of feel. Once I had everything set in a way that I was comfortable with, I started moving on to the typography, which honestly, I didn't really spend a whole lot of time on because I really wasn't sure what to do, and I didn't think it really needed anything crazy or creative. I really just think it needed something simple just to kind of tie the whole poster together and then just kind of showcase the theme a little bit more. What's also funny about this part is I was trying to copy the text that was in one of the posters that I was using as a reference. But what I found out was the image that I was using as a reference was actually a satirical design. So the copy they were using didn't really make sense for the poster that I was making. So I'm going along, just typing along, trying to put in whatever that they had already put in, and I was like, wait, that's not gonna work. So yeah, always double check your references. So anyways, I just had to Google and come up with something else to put there to once again just kind of tie the whole theme of the poster together. One of the things that I did add that I did end up keeping was this flower. I thought it would go well with the leaves, and then I also thought it would kind of draw your attention to the exact point of where the person is sitting, which I thought would be a smart move. From there, I wanted to play around with some textures a little bit, kind of using these torn pieces of paper. I felt like since this was a collage, it should feel a little bit more analog, and right now it just felt very digital, so I kind of wanted to bring in a little bit of that analog feel to it. And so that's when I started messing around with these torn paper textures that I have. But I was really trying not to go too overboard with it because it is still digital, so I don't want to try faking it too much, but it felt like it needed a little bit of something, and I felt like the point where I landed was actually a good one. The last thing that I really experimented with was these text textures that I have. I just have some ripped up magazines that I took some pictures of, And so I was just kind of using that text because I felt like that space between the guy and the compass was empty and it could just use something. And so I really spent a lot of time just trying a bunch of the different images that I have, kind of putting them together in different ways and just seeing what kind of made sense. I didn't want to draw the eye too much to it. I also didn't want to ruin the composition of the image. So I was really just trying to experiment and seeing what I thought would work best. But after that, I was mostly done. I tried a couple other things, but nothing really crazy after that. Now for this poster, I also kind of had an idea of what I wanted to do for it. I found this image of an eagle, and I thought it was really interesting the way that it was composed. Just because it's very top and left heavy, I thought I might be able to do something interesting where I have the eagle on the left, and then I can put some text on the right, and it would fill in really well. But of course, the very first thing that I have to do with any poster like this is remove the background from the image, so I just spent a lot of time doing that and trying to get a really good solid selection out of it. Once I felt comfortable with that, I started moving on to the actual creative part of the poster, which something that I really like doing is adding this specific gradient to my posters. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but in this case, I think it works perfectly for the poster. It also works perfectly with the image that I chose. Once I had that set up, I wanted to get some grid lines just so I could kind of keep everything organized, because what I wanted to do was kind of create this contrast between keeping the text very grid-like and very organized, but then you have the image of the eagle, which has a very natural shape to it, so it kind of breaks up the grid. So that way there's that contrast between grid and not grid. But once I had the grid selected that I wanted to use, I really just started to kind of lay out the typography and the main text of the poster. This is where I wanted to experiment with things a little bit, because I didn't really have an exact idea of how I wanted the text to look. I just knew where I wanted to put the text, and now it was just trying to figure out how exactly I want to stylize that text, or if I even want to stylize the text. So I spent a little bit of time trying to experiment with that and figuring out exactly how I want the text to look. I tried a couple different placements just to kind of see what it might look like, just in case, I was going off of what was in my head, but there was a different and better idea. But honestly, I came back to what I had in my head because I thought that was the best idea. Once I got to a comfortable spot with the text, I wanted to fix the bottom, because the way that the image was taken, the bottom of the eagle was kind of cut off, and I felt like I had to do something to address that. And that's what you see me doing here. I'm really just trying to make this poster work with the image that I selected, and so I just had to figure out some way to kind of fill in that bottom gap. But what's also good about it is it also works with the grid that I chose. So I can still keep with the grid, but it also works perfectly well with the image that I chose. And here's where I came back to the text. I thought about changing it from the right side of the poster and just putting it at the bottom, because I thought that would be a good way to cut it off and it would make sense to kind of put the text there. But nothing I really tried really hit me in a way that I really enjoyed. It looked okay, but it just really wasn't what I had in mind, and it just didn't stand out to me in the way that I thought it would. So for the time being, I abandoned that, and I figured I would come back to that later and I'd figure out the bottom section whenever I had more time. But that was actually good, because when I came back to the main typography, I had a better idea of what I wanted to do. So what I did was I kind of mixed up the text a little bit. So that way Dare 2 was one font and Soar was another. And honestly, it fills out the space great, and it looks a little bit more interesting rather than just having the one font. I also wanted to add a little bit more depth to the poster, and so I changed it so some of the feathers of the eagle either go above or behind the text. I thought that might kind of make it a little bit more dimensional and a little bit more exciting. But after that, I felt like the top part of the poster was pretty much done. So that's when I came back to the bottom part of the poster. Now, I recently bought these label assets from Deconstructed Design. I've been looking out for where and when I can use them, and I thought this would be the perfect time to do that. So I opened up those resources in a different document, and I was just bringing them in and just kind of experimenting with the placement and the different kinds and the different sizes and just seeing what would make sense. But something I also kind of forgot about was the rest of the text for the poster that I needed to add. Because with each one of the posters, there's some text below the kind of the main heading, so I also wanted to include that. Luckily, the way that I designed this poster, it was kind of obvious where I would put the type, but I still wanted to kind of try out some different things and just make sure that it fit as well as it possibly could. But I experimented with a bunch of different labels, a bunch of different designs, and I really just wasn't getting to a place that I thought was giving me the best results that I possibly could. That's when I decided, forget the labels, let's do something else. And so what I ended up coming up with was using this sky image and just using that across the entire bottom of the poster, which honestly, I think works much better than all of the labels that I tried. The blue sky goes really nice with the orange, and it also makes sense for the theme of the poster and the imagery. So honestly, I think that was the best result and the smartest move. But after that, I still needed to figure out what I wanted to do with the text. And since none of the labels that I was using from the resources that I had, I figured I would just make my own. And so that's what I did. I just started kind of testing some things out and trying to make my own custom label that would work for the poster that I was making. I spent a lot of time and effort just trying to make it look as good as I possibly can. And while it's definitely not as good as and exciting as the labels that I have from my resource pack, I do think it came out pretty good. And it works well for the poster. But after that, there wasn't much else to do, really. It was just adding texture and then just kind of finalizing the little bits of details in the poster. Now for this last poster, I didn't have a single idea of what I was gonna do. Obviously, I kind of had the theme that I was going for since I already had a reference poster, but other than that, I really didn't know. I didn't really have the images that I wanted to use. I didn't have an idea for the composition. So really, this was just a free flow kind of design. I started off with this photograph of an old phone that I found, thought maybe I could do something interesting with it, especially since it has a very blocky bottom, but more of an organic top. So I thought, oh, maybe I could do something where the blocky part of the phone is on the bottom, and then you have the actual phone on the top, and that might be kind of interesting. And while the actual composition of it was actually kind of cool, I just didn't know what else to do with it because I wasn't sure where to put the type. I wasn't sure what else I could do with the composition just because I kind of filled out the poster already. And so I ended up moving on from that idea. So after that, I was back to square one and I was just experimenting again. Just moving stuff around, bringing in new images, trying out some different compositions and just doing whatever came to my mind. But none of that was really working, and so I just scratched all that and I thought, why not start with the typography first? I didn't really have an exact idea of what I wanted to do, but I was just kind of going with my gut, going with the flow, and just trying to see what would happen. And what I landed on was breaking up the word communication into syllables and then moving those syllables left and right, alternating. Which honestly, I think is kind of cool. I've seen this style of design done before, but I've never done it for myself. And so this was kind of the most exciting thing for me because I was like, well, never done it before. It looks kind of cool. Might as well go for it. Let's see what happens. But one of the things that I wanted to make sure I had was something that would break up the grid. Since everything was going to be laid out and adhere to a grid format, I wanted to make sure there was something in there that would break up the grid so it's not all just straight lines and organized very neatly. And so I added in this photograph of a phone and a phone cord just kind of dangling and weaving in throughout the poster. And so it adds in something a little bit more organic and not just so straight and constructed. But once I had that set up in a way that I liked, I could start moving on to the rest of the photographs. And like I said, I already had an idea of what I wanted to do. And so really, I was just gonna fill in the extra gaps that I had with photographs. Really simple, but it works, and I think the end results are actually pretty good. And so I took some time because I wanted to find different photographs of different means of communicating. I thought since the poster is all about communication, I should try to include as many different forms of communication that I possibly can. So I spent some time thinking of different means of communication, as well as trying to find some photographs that I think looked good and would work for the poster. Because ultimately, if it's a bad photograph, it really doesn't matter if it's a different form of communication and goes well with the theme. Now, I did want to experiment it by adding in a threshold adjustment over the entire poster. I thought that might make it look kind of cool and give it a unique look. But honestly, I just wasn't really happy with the way that it looked. All I can say is I guess my intuition was telling me that the threshold adjustment just was not the way to go. And so I scratched that and then just kept the photographs as they are. And now I still had to figure out where I was going to put the rest of the text that I was going to use for this poster. And once again, I thought this would be a perfect place to put one of the labels that I've been wanting to use from the resource pack that I recently bought. And so I was really just testing out a couple different labels, putting them in, and then just seeing how they looked inside of the poster. But I felt like they just kept drawing too much attention. But something that I did decide to do was actually keep the images with color. Usually I either apply a very specific color gradient or I'll just desaturate them and make them black and white. But in this instance, I felt like I wanted to use some of the color. Specifically the color that was already in the first image that I used, I thought looked really good. Kind of had an old vintage kind of look to it. And so that's just kind of what I went with. I thought it worked really well for the poster and it looked good. And so I just kind of stuck with that color. But still not happy with the label, I deleted the one that I was using and I just started working on the text. I figured if I can't figure out what I want to do for a label, I'll just put in the text and I'll see if maybe that brings me some inspiration or if I get some other ideas. Now eventually I landed on this label that you see here. Because it's more of a gray and it's not very colorful, it works a lot well with the poster because it has a little bit more of a vintage feel and it also doesn't draw the eye too much. So honestly, I think it worked perfectly. And I also just like that it's not a complete square. And so it has a little bit more of an organic feel to it, which kind of helps set it apart from the rest of the poster, which is very grid-like. But I still had to figure out what I wanted to do with the text because now there was just this really weird empty space and I just had to fill it in a way that I felt looked good. So I started bringing in some different elements and just kind of experimenting and seeing what might look best to showcase the rest of the text that was going into the poster. And I thought, well, I'm already using a label, so why don't I make a label that's specific for the text? And so that's what I did. I just tried to mimic the label that I was making with the label that I'd already been using so it would feel cohesive. Honestly, I think this was a good decision and I think it makes that entire section feel a lot more cohesive. But really after that, there wasn't much else to do than to add some texture and just make it feel complete. So here are the final results. I think it's really cool that all three posters have their own kind of unique style. Whenever I first started these posters, I thought I was going to make them all look similar to each other, but honestly, I think this is a much better direction. It was a lot of fun to try out a couple different things, and that way they all kind of came out unique and represent their own theme in their own way. Now, the very first one, I'm not really sure how I feel about it. Part of me thinks it's kind of cool. Part of me is not really sure about it. I definitely had an idea going into it, what I wanted to do, and I feel like I got pretty close, but not exactly what I had in my head. So maybe I'm just being harsh on myself because it didn't come out exactly how I wanted, but overall, I do think it came out pretty cool. Now, the second one I think is my favorite. It's very similar to the type of stuff that I normally like to make, so it already kind of feels like my style, but I also just think the composition of it is really cool. Like the way the eagle is framed and having the sky at the bottom and the big bold text. I don't know, it all just works together for me. Now the third one is the kind of design that I really haven't experimented much with. Very grid-based, breaking up the typography, and then using a bunch of different imagery. But honestly, I think the end result is pretty good. I'm sure there's a lot of people who could do this style more justice, but since it was my first go at it, I'd say I did a pretty good job. But leave a comment and let me know what you think. Which one's your favorite? I also plan on putting these designs on my store, so I'm gonna leave a link in the description so you can check them out. I just think it'd be really cool to see my work in a bunch of corporate offices. So if you have a corporate office that you wanna put something up in, see if you can make it work. But if you found this video helpful or entertaining in any way, I'd appreciate it if you would check out the rest of my channel and then consider subscribing. I hope to see you in the next video.